Honestly, I'm still just low-key shocked at how aggressively some people react to a leaky puddle of yesterday's spaghetti sauce on the asphalt. I mean, the sheer entitlement is exactly why I started Sovereign Justice in the first place, because you literally can't make this stuff up. Have fun with this one. It's a ride. The Boca Raton heat isn't something you just feel. It's something you wear. It drapes over you the second you open your front door, sticky and oppressive, usually accompanied by the distant, angry buzz of a lawn mower. It was a Tuesday, exactly 7:14 a.m. I was standing in my kitchen, wearing gym shorts and a faded t-shirt, nursing a cup of painfully mediocre French roast coffee, and just staring out the window. I wasn't looking at anything in particular, just letting my brain boot up. And then it happened. Crunch! It wasn't a subtle noise. It was followed by a horrific, scraping squeal of plastic grinding against aggregate asphalt, culminating in a hollow, echoing thwack that actually made the glass in my kitchen window rattle. I froze. My coffee sloshed over the rim of my mug, burning my thumb. I set the mug down on the granite counter with a dull clink, my heart suddenly doing double time. What on earth was that? What, did two cars just collide in the middle of our normally dead quiet cul-de-sac? Did a meteor hit the Smiths' gazebo? I shoved my feet into a pair of beat-up flip-flops and hurried out the front door, bracing myself for the Florida humidity. I jogged down the paver walkway, past the meticulously trimmed hibiscus bushes that I pay entirely too much to have maintained, and stopped dead in my tracks at the edge of the street. It was a massacre. My city-issued, bright green 96-gallon garbage can was currently lying on its side, halfway out into the driving lane of the street. The lid was sprung completely backward, hanging on by a single stressed plastic hinge. And the contents? Oh, the contents were everywhere. A trail of half-eaten, marinara-soaked spaghetti was smeared across the blacktop, like a modern art masterpiece depicting a gruesome crime scene. Coffee grounds were scattered in the breeze. A rogue empty milk jug was rolling slowly down the slight incline toward the storm drain. And there, idling about 20 feet away, was a pristine, pearl-white Mercedes SUV. The reverse lights clicked off. The brake lights glowed a vibrant red. The driver's side door swung open, and out stepped Brenda. Every neighborhood has a Brenda. You know exactly who I'm talking about. She wore oversized, designer sunglasses that covered half her face, plus a tennis skirt, despite the fact that I've never seen her hold a racket, and an expression that permanently looked like she had just caught a whiff of sour milk. She lived directly next door, in a house identical to mine, but somehow she always acted like she resided in an ivory tower looking down upon the peasants. She marched around the back of her SUV, her expensive sandals slapping against the pavement, completely ignoring the spaghetti sauce crime scene. She stopped, but put her hands on her hips and glared at my overturned garbage can, then slowly turned her glare to me. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she snapped, her voice piercing through the humid morning air like a siren. I blinked, looking from her to the trash can and back to her. "What I've done? Brenda, you just hit my trash can with your 2-ton tank." "I most certainly did not," she shrieked, taking a step toward me. "You're hideous. An oversized piece of municipal plastic leaped out and scratched the paint on my passenger side door." I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "It leaped out? Brenda, it's a trash can. It doesn't have legs. It has wheels, sure, but last I checked, it lacks autonomous navigation. I put it right there on the curb, exactly where the city tells us to put it for pickup." I pointed to the spot. It was a perfectly normal patch of asphalt, just on the edge of the street, slightly off the main driving lane. But it was the exact spot I had placed it every Tuesday for the last 3 years. Brenda scoffed, an exaggerated, breathy sound of pure disdain. You deliberately placed it too close to my parking pad. You know I park there. I have to back out of my driveway and pull in there so my husband can get his truck out. You placed it there maliciously. Let's pause here and talk about this parking pad. Between my property line and Brenda's property line, there was a small, roughly paved shoulder. Yet it wasn't a driveway. It wasn't a designated spot. It was just a weird quirk of the street's layout, where the asphalt widened out by a few feet right at the property boundary before narrowing again. For years, Brenda had been using it as her personal VIP parking spot, because her actual two-car driveway was completely choked with her husband's oversized pickup truck, a jet ski trailer that hadn't moved since 2019, and her teenager's rusted-out Mustang project car. "Brenda, that's not a parking pad," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "That's the shoulder of the road. And even if it was a parking spot, I left the can completely within the boundaries of my property line. I know where my grass ends." "It is an eyesore," she yelled, waving her manicured hand at the spilled garbage. "And it's a hazard. Look at the mess you've made on the street. I'm calling the HOA." I stared at her. I couldn't help it. A slow, wide grin spread across my face. "Brenda, we don't live in an HOA." Her mouth opened, then closed. She adjusted her sunglasses, momentarily flustered, before recovering her indignation. "Well, I'm calling the city code enforcement then. You can't just leave garbage strewn across the public roadway." "You hit it!" I yelled back, my patience finally evaporating in the heat. "You backed over it with your car. How are you not getting this?" "If you put that piece of plastic within 10 feet of my car again," she said, at her voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss, "I will run it over. I will crush it into little green pieces, and I will bill you for the detailing my car will require. Mark my words." She didn't wait for a response. She spun around, her tennis skirt swishing, marched back to her Mercedes, slammed the door, and sped off down the street, tires chirping slightly. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the spaghetti sauce baking into the asphalt. Challenge accepted, Brenda. Challenge accepted. And I spent the next 20 minutes cleaning up the mess, dragging the battered but surviving trash can back onto the curb. I went inside, washed my hands, and walked straight into my home office. I didn't open my email. I didn't check my calendar. I opened up Amazon. I needed a camera. 2 days later, a small package arrived on my doorstep. It was a Wise Cam, complete with a window-mounting kit. I spent that Thursday evening carefully positioning it in the front window of my living room, angling it perfectly through the blinds to capture a wide, high-definition view of the curb, the parking pad, and the invisible dividing line between my yard and Brenda's domain. I routed the power cable neatly along the baseboards, synced it to my phone, and tested the motion tracking. It was beautiful. Crystal clear 1080p resolution, night vision, local SD card storage. I was ready. The next Tuesday rolled around. Trash day. I woke up at 6 a.m. I rolled the green bin down the driveway, as the plastic wheels clattering loudly in the pre-dawn quiet. I didn't put it in the street. I didn't put it in her pad. I placed it precisely on the edge of the asphalt, squarely centered in front of my own grass, exactly where I had placed it the week before. I even gave it a little pat on the lid. "Be brave, little guy," I muttered. I went back inside, made my coffee, and sat at the kitchen island, opening the camera app on my phone. At 7:15 a.m., the show began. Through the screen, I watched Brenda's garage door slowly rattle open. The white Mercedes roared to life. She backed out into the street, sharply cranking the wheel. She stopped. I could see her looking through the passenger window at my garbage can. My breath hitched. Would she just drive away? Would she ignore it? Nope. Instead of pulling forward and driving down the street, she threw the SUV back into reverse. She adjusted her angle. She lined up the rear passenger side bumper with the green plastic bin. She's not going to, I whispered to myself. She hit the gas. Bam! Through the phone speaker and faintly through the walls of my house, I heard the impact. The Mercedes bumped hard into the can. The can tilted, teetered on two wheels, and then violently toppled over, skidding 5 feet into the center of the road. Brenda threw the car into drive, completely ignoring the fallen bin, and sped away. I hit the save clip button on my phone. I didn't even bother putting on shoes, and I grabbed my keys, locked the front door, and dialed the non-emergency police dispatch number. Boca Raton Police Dispatch, how can I help you? A bored-sounding operator answered. Hi, yes, I'd like to report a hit-and-run property damage incident, and I have it on high-definition video. It took 45 minutes for a cruiser to roll into the cul-de-sac. By the time it arrived, the sun was fully up, baking the neighborhood in a muggy 90-degree blanket. And as the cruiser parked behind my fallen trash can, lights flashing lazily, 2 officers got out. They looked exactly how you'd expect 2 South Florida cops to look in the middle of a hot summer shift. Sweaty, exhausted, and completely entirely unamused by whatever petty suburban drama they were about to step into. I met them at the curb. Morning, officers, I said, holding out my phone. I'm the one who called, but my neighbor just intentionally rammed my property with her vehicle. The older of the 2 cops, a guy with a thick mustache and a nameplate that read Miller, sighed and looked down at the green bin. Your garbage can, sir. Yes, sir. Is it broken? I looked at it. There was a sizable scuff mark, and the lid was definitely warped, but it was structurally intact. It's damaged, but more importantly, it's the principal. She did it on purpose. I have the video right here. Miller's partner, a younger guy who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else, took out a small notepad. Okay, let's see the video. I hit play. We all stood there on the curb, watching the tiny screen as Brenda lined up the shot and executed the perfect pit maneuver on a piece of municipal plastic. Well, Miller said, scratching the back of his neck, she definitely hit it. Right? I said, feeling a surge of vindication. So, what's the charge? Reckless driving? Destruction of property? Of fleeing the scene of an accident? Miller gave me a look. A long, tired look. Sir, it's a plastic garbage can, belonging to the city. There's no real monetary damage here. Furthermore, it occurred off the main thoroughfare, on the shoulder. But she used her car as a weapon, I argued. Just then, the roar of an engine interrupted us. Brenda's white Mercedes came flying down the street. She slammed on the brakes when she saw the police cruiser, her eyes going wide behind her sunglasses. Yet she pulled aggressively into her parking pad, threw it in park, and practically leaped out of the car. Officers! Officers, thank God you're here! She wailed, her voice suddenly taking on a frantic, trembling pitch. She pressed her hand to her chest. This man is harassing me! He is deliberately placing road hazards in my designated parking area to damage my vehicle. I stared at her, utterly bewildered by the performance. Brenda, I have you on video ramming it. She ignored me, thus turning her big, tear-filled eyes to Officer Miller. I was terrified. It was blocking my safe exit. I had to maneuver around it, and it clipped my bumper. He's trying to ruin my car. Miller held up a hand. Ma'am, calm down. We saw the video. Brenda faltered for a second, a flicker of panic crossing her face, but she instantly doubled down. Then you saw how dangerously close it was. This is my deeded parking pad, which I have the right to safe ingress and egress. It's not your pad, I shouted. It's the shoulder of the road. Okay, enough, Miller barked, his authoritative voice finally cutting through the noise. He looked at me, then at Brenda. Look, neither of you owns the street. This is a civil issue between neighbors. No one is hurt. The damage is negligible. So she just gets away with it? I asked, my blood pressure spiking. She can just play bumper cars with my trash every week? Miller sighed deeply, the sound of a man who dealt with 50 Brendas a week. Sir, I can't write a traffic citation for a collision with a movable, temporary object on an unmarked shoulder. It doesn't meet the statutory requirements for a traffic crash. It's essentially debris. He paused, adjusting his duty belt. He looked at the trash can, then looked back at me, his expression flat, but his eyes locking onto mine for a brief, meaningful second. Now, if she had struck a fixed structure on your private property, that would be a different story. That's a reportable collision. That's property damage. But a plastic bin on wheels? I'm sorry. We're not doing a report for this. A fixed structure. The words hung in the humid air. They echoed in my brain. A fixed structure. Miller tipped his hat to Brenda, who looked incredibly smug. Have a good day, ma'am. Try not to hit anything else. He turned to me. Keep your trash on your side, sir. Have a good one. They got in their cruiser and drove away. Brenda turned to me, a triumphant, wicked smile on her face. I told you, she whispered. Next time, I'm aiming for the center. She turned on her heel and strutted into her house. I didn't say a word. I just slowly bent down, picked up my trash can, and wheeled it back to the house. I wasn't mad anymore. I was inspired. Officer Miller didn't know it, didn't. Well, but he had just handed me the keys to the kingdom. I went inside, booted up my desktop computer, and cracked my knuckles. It was time to go to work. I didn't need to yell at Brenda. I didn't need the police. Not yet, anyway. I needed data. I opened the Palm Beach County Property Appraiser's website. It's a clunky, outdated piece of government software that looks like it was designed in 1998, but it houses the holy grail of neighborhood warfare. Property lines. I typed in my address, and the digital map loaded, showing the little rectangular parcels of our street. I zoomed in on my house. I zoomed in on Brenda's house. I looked at the dividing line between them. Then, I pulled up the satellite overlay. I stared at the screen, my jaw slowly dropping. Well, I'll be damned, I muttered to the empty room. Brenda's precious parking pad, that little widened patch of asphalt she claimed as her deeded right, didn't belong to the city, and it sure as hell didn't belong to Brenda. Chos. According to the county map, the property line didn't run straight down the middle of the empty space between our houses. Because of a weird curve in the cul-de-sac, the line angled sharply. The municipal utility easement ended exactly at the curb. That patch of extra asphalt, all 80 square feet of it, it was a full 3 feet inside my property line. She wasn't parking on the street. She had been parking her 2-ton German luxury SUV on my private property for 3 years, and I needed to be absolutely 100% certain. A fuzzy satellite image from a county website wouldn't hold up in court, and it certainly wouldn't stop Brenda. I needed hard, undeniable, legally binding proof. I picked up my phone and searched for local land surveyors. I found a company with a 5-star rating and a website that looked like it was from this decade. I called them up. Precision Land Surveying. This is Hank. The voice was gruff, gravelly, and sounded like it had smoked a pack of Marlboros before breakfast. Hi, Hank. I need a residential boundary survey done. Just a standard lot, but I need the exact property line staked out between me and my neighbor, like down to the millimeter accurate. Having a fence dispute, buddy? Hank asked, chuckling. Something like that, I replied. How soon can you get out here? I've got a crew in Boca tomorrow morning. Can squeeze you in around 9 a.m. Perfect. See you then. The next morning, a beat-up white Ford Ranger with a yellow strobe light on the roof pulled up to my house. Out stepped Hank. He was exactly what he sounded like on the phone. Late 50s, leathery skin from decades in the Florida sun, wearing a faded high-vis vest and a battered straw hat. He and his younger assistant hauled out a bright yellow tripod and a highly expensive-looking robotic total station. I went out to meet them. Hank? I'm the guy who called. So, the line I care about is right there. I pointed to the space between my house and Brenda's, right where the white Mercedes was currently parked. Hank took one look at the car, then looked at his plat maps. He grinned. All right, let's find the pins. For the next hour, Hank and his assistant roamed my yard with metal detectors, digging small holes near the sidewalk and in the back corner of the lot to find the original iron rebars buried by the developers 30 years ago. And once they found the control points, they set up the total station. The machine whirred and clicked, shooting invisible lasers to the prism pole his assistant was holding. Slowly, methodically, they began walking up the side of my property, driving wooden stakes into the ground and tying neon pink flagging tape to them. Stake, hammer, pink ribbon. Stake, hammer, pink ribbon. They got closer and closer to the street, closer and closer to Brenda's car, closer to... Or Hank walked right up to the passenger door of the Mercedes. He looked through his instrument. He looked at the ground. He took a can of inverted neon pink marking paint off his belt. Psst. He sprayed a thick, bright pink line directly onto the asphalt, passing right underneath the undercarriage of Brenda's car. The line clearly showed that the entire right side of her vehicle, including both passenger side tires, was resting comfortably on my side of the boundary. Right on cue, but Brenda's front door flew open. "What are you doing?" she screamed, rushing out of her house in a silk robe, her hair wrapped in a towel. "Get away from my car! Are you spraying paint on my car?" Hank didn't even flinch. He slowly stood up, wiped the sweat off his forehead with the back of a calloused hand, and looked at her. "Not spraying the car, ma'am," Hank said, his voice a calm, gravelly rumble. "Spraying the ground, as establishing the legal property boundary for the client." "You are defacing my parking pad," she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at him. "I'm calling the police." Hank let out a dry, hacking laugh. He reached into his vest, pulled out a laminated business card, and held it out to her. "Ma'am, I am a licensed surveyor in the state of Florida. I'm executing a legal boundary survey based on the recorded county plat. Unless your name is on the deed to this lot right here." He pointed his thumb at my house. "I suggest you step back before I bill you for interrupting my hourly rate, because right now your vehicle is trespassing." Brenda looked at the pink line running under her car. She looked at Hank. She looked at me, standing a few feet away with my arms crossed, trying incredibly hard not to laugh out loud. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "This is an easement. It's public access." "Actually, well, Brenda," I chimed in, stepping forward. "The utility easement only covers the first 6 feet from the curb, and it doesn't grant parking rights. The actual property line, as Hank here is so expertly demonstrating, runs right under your transmission, which means you are parked on my private property." She stared at the pink line as if it were a venomous snake. "I've been parking here for 3 years. You can't just take it away." "I'm not taking anything away, Brenda," I said softly, or delivering the killing blow. "I'm just reclaiming what's mine. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to need you to move your car. I have some construction planned." "Construction?" she scoffed. "What could you possibly be building there?" I just smiled. "A fixed structure, Brenda's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. She opened her mouth to argue, probably to threaten the HOA that we literally do not have again. But then she looked down at the bright neon pink line running directly under her Mercedes. She looked at Hank, who was already packing up his expensive laser equipment, clearly done with her drama. And then she looked at me. She didn't say another word. She spun around, her silk robe billowing behind her, and stormed back into her house, slamming the front door so hard I'm pretty sure the weather stripping fell off. Honestly, I almost felt a tiny, fleeting moment of pity for her. Almost. But then I remembered the marinara sauce baking into the street, and the smug look on her face when Officer Miller refused to write a ticket. So, the pity evaporated instantly. Hank handed me a signed, stamped copy of the official property survey. Here you go, buddy. Legally binding. You want me to leave the stakes? Leave them, I said, grinning as I handed him a check. I want her to see that pink line every time she looks out her window. With the survey in hand, I went back inside and locked the door. It was time for Phase 2. I mean, sure, I could have just used the survey to ask the police to have her towed for trespassing, but honestly, that's a temporary fix. She'd just complain, claim it was a mistake, and probably start a passive-aggressive war of attrition involving loud music or blowing grass clippings onto my driveway. I didn't want a battle. I wanted total, unconditional surrender. So I wanted to make it physically impossible for her to ever park there again. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the official Boca Raton Municipal Code database. Now, if you've never read municipal building codes, let me tell you, it is literally the most boring, soul-crushing literature on the planet. It makes reading a VCR manual feel like a gripping thriller. But when you're fueled by spite and bad coffee, it reads like poetry. I spent 4 hours clicking through zoning laws, setback requirements, and easement restrictions. I was looking for something very specific. I needed to build something on that spot. Something heavy, something permanent, something that a car could not move. But here's the catch. You can't just go pouring concrete and building walls 3 feet from the street. There are right-of-way rules. There are sightline ordinances for traffic. You build a brick wall there, the city will come knock it down and fine you into oblivion. But then I found it. I guess the universe just rewards malicious compliance, because sitting right there in the Florida Building Code, specifically under the local addendums for the high-velocity hurricane zone, or HVHZ, as the locals call it, was my golden ticket. Because South Florida gets battered by hurricanes, the building codes are insane. Everything has to be strapped down, bolted down, or rated to withstand 150-mile-per-hour winds, and that includes outdoor storage. As I clicked into a beautifully obscure subsection. Ordinance 14.2. Solid waste enclosures and receptacles. I started reading, and I swear to God, I started laughing out loud in my empty home office. The ordinance explicitly stated that residents residing within designated HVHZ areas are not only allowed, but encouraged to petition the municipal building department for the installation of a permanent storm-resistant solid waste receptacle tie-down pad and enclosure. Why? To prevent large municipal garbage cans from becoming 96-gallon green projectiles during a Category 5 hurricane. The code was incredibly specific. It couldn't be a solid wall-blocking visibility. It had to be an open-air cage or a heavy-duty retention system. It had to be anchored to a poured concrete footing or directly into structural asphalt using half-inch steel wedge anchors. And the best part? And the ordinance explicitly stated that these tie-down pads must be located adjacent to the municipal right-of-way for easy trash collection access. It was literally a legal mandate to build a tank trap exactly where Brenda parked her car. I didn't waste a second. I opened up a CAD program on my computer. I'm no architect, but I know how to draw a box. I designed a heavy-duty, powder-coated steel cage, exactly large enough to house my specific municipal garbage can. I designed it with an open front for easy access and a heavy steel latching bar. Then, I drafted the anchoring system, a square cut into the asphalt, a high-strength concrete pour, and 4 massive steel bolts securing the cage to the earth. I printed the designs, attached Hank's officially stamped property survey showing the proposed location was fully within my property lines, and highlighted the exact wording of Ordinance 14.2. I drove straight to the Boca Raton Municipal Permitting Office. But if you want to test your sanity, spend an afternoon in a Florida permitting office. It's a room lit by flickering fluorescent lights, smelling faintly of old paper and despair, filled with angry contractors arguing with tired clerks behind thick plexiglass windows. I pulled a ticket. Number 42. The digital sign said they were serving number 18. I sat in a hard plastic chair for 2.5 hours, listening to a guy in a stained painter's shirt yell about a roof pitch variance. Finally, my number was called. I walked up to window 3. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Dolores, whose name tag was hanging on for dear life, looked at me over the rim of her reading glasses. She had the expression of someone who had been screamed at over setbacks for the last 20 years. "What you got?" she asked, her voice a flat monotone. "I'd like to submit an expedited permit application for an HVAC solid waste tie-down pad and enclosure," I said, sliding my thick manila folder under the plexiglass slot. Dolores frowned. She pulled the folder through, opened it, and started flipping through my meticulously organized paperwork. She looked at the CAD drawing. She looked at the survey. She looked at the highlighted ordinance. "A hurricane tie-down for a garbage can?" she asked, looking back up at me. "Nobody actually pulls permits for these. Most people just bungee cord them to a fence when a storm comes." "I take hurricane preparedness very seriously, Dolores," I said, maintaining absolute deadpan eye contact. "I just couldn't live with myself if my 96-gallon municipal receptacle became airborne and damaged public property. Or, say, a neighbor's vehicle." Dolores stared at me for a long, quiet moment. I think she saw right through my soul. She looked at the property survey again, noting the pink line and the tight proximity to the property boundary. She looked at the heavy steel specifications on my drawing. A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. She knew exactly what I was doing. "The footprint is under 4 square feet, she muttered to herself, running a red pen over the drawing. "Anchoring meets HVAC wind load requirements. Location is compliant with right-of-way access." She reached over, grabbed a massive rubber stamp. I inked it heavily on a pad and slammed it down onto my application. Approved. "That'll be $35 for the administrative fee," Dolores said, sliding the paperwork back to me. "Make sure you call for the final inspection when the concrete cures." "Dolores," I said, handing her my credit card, "you are an American hero." I walked out of that office feeling like I had just won the Super Bowl. I had the law, I had the permit. Now I needed the muscle. And I spent the weekend calling local paving and concrete companies. Most of them laughed at me when I told them I wanted a 3x3 square of asphalt cut and a steel cage bolted to the ground. The jobs were too small, they said, not worth getting the trucks out. But then I called Mike. Mike owned a small, independent hardscaping company. When I explained the job over the phone, he sounded skeptical. "You want me to bring an asphalt saw and a hammer drill out there for a garbage can?" I'll pay your full daily minimum, I offered. Cash. I'll be there Tuesday at 7 a.m., Mike said. Tuesday morning arrived. It was exactly 1 week after the Great Spaghetti Sauce incident. The sun wasn't even fully up yet, painting the Florida sky in streaks of bruised purple and orange. I was standing in my driveway with a fresh cup of coffee, waiting. Right at 6:55 a.m., and the rumble of a heavy-duty diesel engine shattered the quiet of the neighborhood. A massive Ford F350, pulling a flatbed trailer loaded with concrete bags, a generator, and serious power tools pulled into the cul-de-sac. It parked right in front of my house. Out stepped Mike. He was a big guy, wearing steel-toed boots, heavily stained jeans, and a t-shirt that said, "We'll pour for beer." He was holding a large Yeti thermos and looking around the street. "You the guy with the garbage cage?" he asked as I walked up. "That's me," I said, shaking his massive, calloused hand. I handed him an envelope with his daily minimum in cash, plus a little extra for what was about to happen. "Thanks for coming out." Mike pocketed the envelope. "All right, show me where this thing is going." I led him over to the edge of the street, right to the spot between my property and Brenda's. Her white Mercedes was parked there, and sitting smugly over my pink neon property line, its rear bumper practically resting over the exact spot I needed Mike to drill. Mike looked at the car. He looked at the pink line. He looked at the officially stamped city permit in my hand. He let out a low whistle. "Let me get this straight," Mike said, a massive grin spreading across his face. "You pulled a municipal hurricane permit to bolt a heavy steel cage directly into the pavement, right underneath your neighbor's passenger door?" "Actually," I corrected him, "right underneath where my neighbor's passenger door illegally trespasses on my private property." Mike started laughing. A deep, booming belly laugh that echoed down the street. "Buddy, I have been pouring concrete in Boca for 20 years. I've seen spite fences. I've seen spite hedges. I have never seen a spite municipal garbage tie down. This is beautiful." "Glad you like it," I said. "Only problem is, her car is in the way. Can we work around it?" "We can cut the asphalt," Mike said, pulling on a pair of heavy leather work gloves. "But once we start throwing concrete dust and sparking that saw, she might want to move it, unless she wants a new gray paint job." Mike signaled to his crew, 2 younger guys who looked equally amused, and they fired up the generator. It was 7:10 a.m. Mike grabbed a massive gas-powered concrete saw. It looked like a chainsaw on steroids with a diamond-tipped circular blade. He ripped the pull cord. The 2-stroke engine screamed to life, a deafening, high-pitched roar that could probably be heard 3 neighborhoods over. He walked right up to the passenger side of Brenda's Mercedes, positioned the blade exactly 2 inches inside my pink property line, and lowered it into the asphalt. The noise was apocalyptic. A thick plume of gray dust and pulverized rock shot into the air, it completely engulfing the side of the white SUV. Sparks flew as the diamond blade bit through the blacktop. It took exactly 45 seconds for Brenda's front door to fly open. She came running out of the house in her silk robe again, arms flailing, practically screaming at the top of her lungs, but her voice was completely drowned out by the roar of the concrete saw. She ran right up to the edge of the dust cloud, coughing and waving her hands frantically. Mike didn't even blink. He just kept cutting, carving a perfect straight line into the street. Brenda grabbed a hose from her front yard and looked like she was about to spray Mike, so I casually strolled over and stepped between her and the crew. "Morning, Brenda!" I yelled over the noise, giving her a cheerful, neighborly wave. "Beautiful day for some home improvement, isn't it?" "Make them stop!" she shrieked, her face turning a vibrant shade of magenta. "They are covering my car in dust! Like they are ruining my paint!" "They're just doing their jobs, Brenda," I yelled back. "I told you I had construction planned, remember? I highly suggest you move your vehicle, because once they break out the jackhammer to pull up that asphalt, chunks of rock are going to be flying everywhere." She looked at the massive saw, the thick cloud of dust coating her pristine Mercedes, and then at me. "I am calling the police. This is illegal. You are vandalizing the road." I reached into my back pocket. Then pulled out the laminated city permit with Dolores's beautiful bright red approved stamp and held it up to Brenda's face. "Fully permitted by the city of Boca Raton," I shouted with a massive smile. "HVHZ Solid Waste Tie-Down Pad, Section 14.2 of the Municipal Code. Totally legal." Brenda's eyes darted frantically over the permit. She couldn't read the fine print without her glasses, but she definitely recognized a city seal when she saw one. Yet she let out a frustrated scream that was completely swallowed by the sound of the saw. She ran around to the driver's side of her car, yanked the door open, threw herself inside, and slammed it shut. She started the engine, threw it into drive, and practically peeled out of the parking pad, leaving a trail of gray dust billowing behind her as she sped off down the street. Mike hit the kill switch on the saw. The sudden silence in the cul-de-sac was deafening. He lifted his safety glasses, and looked down the street at the retreating Mercedes, and then looked at me. "Well," Mike said, wiping dust off his face, "that solved the clearance issue." "Drill deep, Mike," I told him. Drill deep. For the next 3 hours, I sat in a lawn chair on my front porch, drinking coffee and watching the most satisfying construction project of my entire life. Mike and his crew were artists. They used a jackhammer to break up the asphalt square they had cut, exposing the compacted dirt underneath. But they dug down about 12 inches, framing out a small box with wooden forms. They mixed a heavy, fast-setting structural concrete and poured it into the hole, leveling it perfectly flush with the surrounding street. While the concrete was curing, they unboxed the custom steel cage I had ordered. It was a beast. 1/4-inch thick, powder-coated galvanized steel piping. It weighed easily 150 pounds. Once the concrete was hard enough, Mike pulled out a massive Hilti rotary hammer drill. He positioned the cage over the fresh pad, marked the 4 corner anchor plates, and drilled deep into the concrete and the underlying asphalt layer. He dropped in 4 massive, 1/2-inch steel wedge anchors, grabbed an impact wrench, and tightened them down. Zzzt. Zzzt. The sound of those bolts locking into place was like a symphony. Mike grabbed the top bar of the steel cage and hauled back with all his weight. But the cage didn't even vibrate. It was fused to the earth. You could have backed a dump truck into it and the truck would have lost. "She ain't going anywhere," Mike declared, packing up his tools. "A Category 5 hurricane could come through here and rip your entire house off its foundation, but your garbage can is going to be sitting right here." "Mike, you're a legend," I said, handing him an extra $50 for buying his guys lunch. "My pleasure," he laughed, climbing back into his truck. Call me if she tries to blow it up." They drove off, leaving me alone with my masterpiece. I walked over to the curb. There it sat. A heavy-duty, industrial steel cage permanently bolted to a concrete pad sitting exactly 3 feet inside my property line. Sitting exactly in the dead center of Brenda's illegal parking spot. I walked up my driveway, grabbed my green, beat-up, spaghetti-stained municipal garbage can and rolled it down to the street. I slid it right into the open face of the cage. It fit like a glove. I swung the steel latching bar across the front and locked it in place with a heavy brass padlock. I stepped back and admired my work. It was hideous. It was entirely unnecessary. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I went inside, washed up, and sat down at my computer to do some actual work. But honestly, I couldn't focus. I kept glancing at the live feed from my Wise camera on my second monitor. I was just waiting for the grand finale. I didn't have to wait long. At 4:30 p.m., the familiar shape of the white Mercedes turned onto the cul-de-sac. I grabbed my phone, hit record on the camera feed, and walked over to the front window, peeking through the blinds. Brenda was driving slowly. The dust from the morning had mostly blown off her car, but she looked exhausted. She pulled up to the front of her house, past her husband's truck, past the jet ski, and angled her steering wheel toward her usual spot. She hadn't noticed it yet. She was probably looking at her phone or digging in her purse. She just blindly turned the wheel and hit the gas to pull into the pad. Through the thick glass of my window, I heard the impact. Clang! It wasn't the dull thud of plastic this time. It was the horrific, metal-on-metal, soul-shattering sound of a luxury German automobile violently striking an immovable steel object. The Mercedes jolted to a dead stop. The rear passenger side of her bumper had made direct, high-speed contact with the steel corner post of my Hurricane tie-down cage. The impact was so hard the entire SUV shuddered on its suspension. I watched the cage on the monitor. It literally hadn't moved a millimeter. The driver's side door of the Mercedes flew open. Brenda stumbled out. She practically ran to the back of her car, looking down at the bumper. Even from my window, I could see the damage, as the pearl-white bumper cover was cracked when it's open, splintered like an eggshell. The quarter panel was dented inwards, and a massive scrape of black powder coating from my cage was smeared across the expensive paint job. Brenda let out a scream that I could hear clearly through the insulated walls of my house. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated rage. She turned, looked directly at my house, and started marching up my driveway. I didn't even wait for her to ring the doorbell. And I swung the front door open and stood on the porch, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Can I help you, Brenda?" I asked politely. "You psycho!" she screamed, spit actually flying from her lips. "You built a barricade in the middle of the street! You destroyed my car! I'm calling the police right now! I'm having you arrested!" She already had her phone out, aggressively jabbing at the screen with her long nails. "You do that, Brenda," I said, smiling warmly. "I highly encourage it. In fact, tell them to send Officer Miller. He's already familiar with the situation." She glared at me with absolute hatred, holding the phone to her ear. "Yes, police! I need an officer at my address immediately. My neighbor just intentionally destroyed my vehicle with an illegal barricade. Yes, hurry!" She hung up and pointed her phone at me like a weapon. "You're going to jail, and you're buying me a new car." "We'll see about that," I replied, whilst pulling a thick manila envelope from the entryway table and stepping out onto the porch to wait. It took them 20 minutes this time. Sure enough, the same cruiser pulled into the cul-de-sac. And sure enough, Officer Miller stepped out, looking even more tired than he had a week ago. He took one look at the cracked Mercedes bumper, then looked at the massive steel cage bolted into the asphalt, complete with a locked garbage can inside. He stopped in his tracks, took off his hat, and rubbed his temples. "Officer!" Brenda wailed, running up to him. "Look what he did! He built this steel trap right where I park. He did it on purpose to destroy my car." Miller walked slowly over to the cage. He kicked the steel base plate with the toe of his heavy boot. It didn't budge. He looked at the massive wedge anchors driven into the concrete. "Well," Miller muttered, almost to himself. "That's a fixed structure, all right." He turned to me, standing comfortably on my lawn. Sir? What exactly is this?" I walked over, handing him the manila envelope. "Officer Miller, good to see you again. That is a fully permitted, municipal code-compliant, high-velocity hurricane zone, solid waste tie-down pad, and enclosure. As you can see from the attached property survey, it is located entirely within my property boundaries. And as you can see from the city permit, it was approved by the building department just yesterday. Miller opened the envelope, and he pulled out the survey with the pink lines clearly marked. He pulled out the permit with the giant red stamp. He pulled out the printed section of Ordinance 14.2. He read in silence for a solid minute. Brenda was vibrating with rage. "Arrest him! He vandalized the right-of-way! He maliciously damaged my property!" Miller slowly folded the paperwork and slid it back into the envelope. He handed it back to me. Then he turned to Brenda. His expression was completely blank, but there was a dangerous, no-nonsense glint in his eye. "Ma'am," Miller said slowly, his voice dropping an octave. "According to these legally binding documents, this structure is fully permitted, legally constructed, and situated on this gentleman's private property." "But my car!" she shrieked, pointing at the cracked bumper. "Yes," Miller said, pulling out his ticket book. Your car, which you just admitted to driving, struck a stationary, legally permitted structure on private property." Brenda stopped screaming. Her mouth fell open. "What?" "You failed to maintain control of your vehicle, ma'am," Miller continued, clicking his pen. "You struck a fixed object. Furthermore, because you struck a fixed object on private property, this is now a reportable traffic collision." "You can't be serious," she gasped, stepping back. "You're writing me a ticket?" "But he put it there to hit me." "He put it there because the Florida Building Code allows him to," Miller stated flatly, starting to write. "You hit it because you weren't paying attention to where you were driving. And considering your vehicle is currently blocking a municipal roadway because it is no longer parked within a designated parking area or an authorized shoulder," he looked back at his cruiser, where his partner was already on the radio. I'm also going to have to call a tow truck to clear the lane." I literally had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. "A tow truck?" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking. "You can't tow my car from my own house." "You're not parked at your house, ma'am," Miller pointed out logically. "You're parked illegally in the street. You have a driveway. I suggest you use it." Brenda looked at her driveway, completely blocked by the truck and the jet ski, and she looked at the police officer writing her a citation. She looked at the steel cage, standing defiantly in the late afternoon sun. And then she burst into tears. Real, sobbing tears. She snatched the yellow ticket from Miller's hand, turned around, and ran back into her house, sobbing hysterically. 10 minutes later, a flatbed tow truck arrived, hooked up the white Mercedes, and hauled it away. Officer Miller walked over to me as the tow truck pulled out of the cul-de-sac, and he looked at the cage, then looked at me. "You know," Miller said quietly, "when I told you last week that we only write reports for fixed structures." "Yes, sir," I asked innocently. Miller let out a slow breath, and a tiny, almost invisible smile touched his lips. "I didn't think you'd actually go out and build Fort Knox for a garbage can. Have a good evening, sir." "You too, officer." I stood there in the quiet cul-de-sac. The sun was setting, us casting a warm golden glow over the neighborhood. The street was empty. The illegal parking spot was officially, permanently closed for business. My trash can sat securely in its steel fortress, ready to weather any storm, literal or metaphorical. So, Justice Junkies, the next time an entitled neighbor decides your trash can is in their way, don't just get mad. Get on your county clerk's website, check those property lines, And definitely read up on your local hurricane codes. Just because there is absolutely nothing sweeter than watching a 2-ton ego check itself against half-inch steel wedge anchors. Stay petty, stay legal, and I'll catch you on the flip side.